My name is Dr. Nicholas Serenati, and I am thrilled to be the moderator for this highly anticipated discussion with our wonderfully impressive panelists. For the audience's information, as part of our rules of engagement, each panelist will be given a question, and they will have approximately 3 minutes to answer that question that is on the floor. From that point, we will move on and about with follow-up questions and discussions as the conversation sees fit. So without further ado, let's meet everyone. Our first panelist, if you don't mind raising your hand as we go through this, Cordelia Henry is the associate of the Chartered Institute of Bankers with over 32 years experience in retail finance for blue chip financial institutions in London, Asia, and the Middle East. Cordelia focuses on identifying and providing solutions for a multitude of clients. Specifically, Cordelia leads organizations in strategy development to increase sales revenue or enhance the skills of their female workforce. Cordelia is also the founder of Pearlescence, a community where female entrepreneurs and corporate professionals can find inspiration, encouragement, and support through the power of a network. Next, we have Rakhi Voria. She is the director of IBM Global Digital Sales Development, where she manages a team that is responsible for the strategy, implementation, and revenue of digital sales development function globally. Rakhi has a strong passion for advancing women in sales and millennials in business. You can locate Rakhi's insights and knowledge on these topics through her publications in Forbes, where Rakhi serves as a member of the Forbes Business Development Council. Further, Rakhi is the executive co-chair of Women at IBM NYC, and their focus is on building partnerships with other companies to learn how they can support, advance, and retain their female talent. Next, we have Dr. Gerald Fry, who is a distinguished international professor of international and intercultural education in the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development at the University of Minnesota. Over the course of his impressive career in academia, Gerald has held positions of academic leadership in numerous seminars and committees focused on international studies. With a research focus in Southeastern Asia, specifically Thailand, Gerald has amassed a remarkable body of publications that aim to better understand the global perspectives on international education. Khandicia Randolph is a consultant on leadership and organizational development. In this work, Khandicia is an analytical leader with an extensive background in guiding public policy, training, and organizational development initiatives. As a leader from the great state of Missouri, Khandicia has consulted for a number of public and private agencies, including the Public Library and Public School System of Columbia, Socket Telecom, Palin Music, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority in Kansas City, and the University of Missouri Department of Equity and Inclusion. These organizations were enriched by Khandicia's diverse leadership communication training seminars and strategic foresight workshops. And last but not least, Suchitra Siriamornsarp, or Remy for short, is an independent wealth planner in Thailand. Remy's work is focused on creating financial plans for high net worth and mass affluent clients based on needs analysis. Additionally, Remy works with key wealth management partners in Thailand to provide customized financial solutions to clients. In doing so, Remy has been recognized as a qualified member of the $1 Million Roundtable, Court of the Table since 2019, and this is a premier association of financial professionals. So a round of applause for all of our panelists, of course. And for our virtual conference audience, please remember to connect with the participants of this conference, including our panelists, on their social media platforms in order for us to continue the good work of building communities of knowledge. Now, with our introductions out of the way, let us begin the conversation. Sorry about my light there. All right, so we have a couple wonderful questions here that will allow us to get started and go forth. Excuse me one second. I got kicked out of my docs, and we will be able to begin here shortly. If I may, I need just to enter, because we're having just one technical difficulty here. I apologize for the wait for everybody. And we should be in. So we have a question to get us all started here to kind of get the wheels turning. And I'll open it up to the group and we can kind of toss it around to see where we are on this. So question number one, how has the work environment evolved in terms of addressing inequalities and inequities during your career? And let's begin with Remy, if you don't mind.
Yes, hi, thanks for the question, Nicholas. I think personally, I've been in the finance industry, in the banking industry for 25 years, so I can share what has changed significantly. Women have always been in mid-management roles earlier on, and of course, a lot of client-facing in the sales position, and they've been doing incredibly well. But along the years, I think women have moved up to more strategic senior management positions, including being chief executive officers of big multinational companies. So I see that a lot of that movement in the MNCs, but maybe in the local, not as much as yet, but it's on the way, it's progressing. But definitely in the big organizations, I would say that. I'd like to share a story in that. I was actually interviewed by one of the head of marketing department for one insurance company, maybe around 15 years back. I met her again I think last year, and today she's the chief executive officer of a very big insurance company, which already shows the progress, of women being up there in key leadership roles.
Excellent, thank you, Remy, very much. Cordelia, would you offer some insight on that from your position? Oop, I think we have you muted there, just really quick. Yeah, no worries.
Hi, ladies. So I have a question for you that I would love you to share your answers to in the chat. How many of you have had to dim your light to fit into the corporate world, to dampen aspects of your personality that if you showed it, you were told you were too aggressive, too outspoken, too bossy? Well, that was my experience in 1983 when I was part of the financial service industry. And it made me feel less than. Now, what I have realized over the last 35 plus years is that women are having a voice. They're doing a fabulous job of sharing their truth. And yes, we are still having to deal with a term called mansplaining. But certainly we're not prepared to shut up and sit down. We want to be vocal, and we want to do so in a way that allows our voice to be heard. Now, I'm actually currently in the entrepreneurial world. And what I see is a lot of women starting businesses because they have had enough of being dimmed down and quietened. And they've decided to use their skills and talents to add to the world economy with their gifts that they've been given. So to answer your question, Nicholas, things have evolved. It's not where we want it to be, but we're certainly on our way to having the recognition that we need as a phenomenal member of the economy.
Excellent. Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting phrase there, that the dim your light, and hopefully over the course of this hour and change that we'll be able to kind of unpack that a little bit better so that we understand. So thank you very much for that. I think that's going to be something that we'll be able to work with. Rakhi, if it's possible, can you shed some light on this question as well?
Yes, and hello everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak at this important event. It's an honor to be here, and also happy Women's History Month. It's an exciting month for us. And before I answer the question, I'll say that my experience has been in the private sector. So as you heard, I'm currently at IBM, previously was at Microsoft. And in terms of what led me to the private sector and technology, academically, I had studied international political economics. And I think through my studies, I saw that the world was becoming borderless and business was globalizing. And I had a chance to see a lot of the inequities that people faced all over the world around access to technology, education, healthcare, welfare, all of those things. And I realized I wanted to work for a company that had the ability to do something about it. I truly believe that technology and the private sector have the power to change the world. And I know a lot of people might think, well, why not a nonprofit or an NGO? But I think both play an important role in driving impact in that space and contributing to societal change. So an important piece of this question is having corporations kind of take a stand in removing some of those systemic barriers. So in terms of what I think has evolved during my career, I think we're seeing many more companies doing that. And it's driven by the fact that things have gotten more public, which I think is a good thing. We're starting to see a zero tolerance policy. There's a big piece on this cancel culture. You think about a few years ago, the Uber situation where one of their employees very publicly shared their experience, and it sort of led to a movement. And I think, some of that is actually really good because it's shedding light on some of the issues that are taking place in these companies. And more importantly, it's holding people accountable. So I'm proud to say that at IBM, for example, we actually publicly share some of our diversity statistics. So until you actually show and confront some of the harsh realities, how do you really build yourself a plan and hold each other accountable? So that's one of the things that I think has positively moved in the right direction. It's obviously not great to hear some of these stories coming out, but it's helping to shift the dialogue to actually move to inaction.
Yes, certainly so. And I think you're absolutely right. It's, you got to have a transitional period to where you're kind of going through some of these tougher times to get to the place that we all want to be. So thank you, Rakhi, very much. Khandicia, would you like to share your thoughts on this particular question as well?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I kind of like to answer the question in a two-pronged situation. One, in my particular field, I work in the telecom industry looking at regulatory issues on both sides of the platform. And one thing that I find every day is that women are still not equitably or equally integrated into those positions. Most of the vendors whom I work with, as well as IT or MIS or CIS professionals at other companies are still men. In addition to them being men, it's a lack of diversity as well in terms of telecom upper management, especially executive and C-suite management. And so unfortunately, that is still one of the industries that lags behind greatly as it references both women and minorities. Another thing that kind of pivots off of what the last speaker said is that when we're looking at major corporations and what we know to be as corporate social responsibility, which is corporations taking responsibility socially for their effect on a gamut of issues, we have to be willing to hold these organizations accountable in terms of our patronage and our interaction with them. It is insufficient to simply have policies that are geared towards equitability of women or minorities or any other marginalized population without carrying through on those initiatives, without making them a portion of your budget or strategic plan. Without those infrastructures being in place, we never truly accomplish or achieve that equitability that we're looking for and that we're here to discuss today.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that insight. And to follow up on all this, to kind of round it out, because we've had such great answers thus far from the workforce, I'm really curious about Gerald and how academia is playing a role in all of this development.
Actually, I've been in academia following this issue for now in my seventh decade. So I have some historical perspective on this. And the data I'll share are primarily actually from the Stanford Center for Poverty and Inequality and the National Academy of Sciences. And Khandicia mentioned this in terms of gender integration. I'm very, very concerned. The movement toward gender parity and equity basically was making considerable progress in the 70s and 80s, but stalled. Basically, it stalled since 1990. So there's a very serious problem of a lack of, it's sometimes called economic segregation, economic integration, segmented labor market theory. The idea is that women are channeled into those positions and in whatever sector that are the lowest paid, the lowest prestige, and require the lowest capabilities. We must deal with this problem of economic integration. And there's been little progress since 1990, and it's estimated by the Stanford Center, given the lack of progress, that it's going to take at current rates of progress, it's going to take 330 years to achieve gender parity. And I find that really frustrating. And then Harvard Education, the business school at Harvard has just come out with research showing in 17 out of 19 skill areas, women are superior.
Certainly.
So I'm very frustrated.
Yeah, and certainly with all of your research and looking into this, I'm sure that these statistics are certainly frustrating for everybody. So let's kind of move forward and hopefully maybe we can kind of break that trajectory down a little bit and move forward quicker. So my next question again, and I'll go to the group on this because I think that we're kind of getting a really good rhythm here, and to speak specifically about your professional experience in this particular vein, based off of what Gerald has just given us. How have inequalities been confronted and navigated, knowing that the systemic problem is already set us up in these ways? How have you been successful in navigating these issues moving forward? And we'll go back to Remy here, if you don't mind.
I think that's an excellent question, Nicholas. I think being woman, it takes to double the effort to be seen and to be heard. And I think that's one very important element that when you enter any organization, for me was financial industry, was to be seen and to be heard. But to do that, you really have to work your way up the ladder. And you have to work harder. So for me, what I basically did, and I would recommend other young professionals, is when you do get into an organization, try to find a mentor, a coach, someone who you can look upon to, someone who can tell you how to go through the organization, what is the right thing, what is a culture. You know, it gives you a quick start. And you can, I would say you can survive longer and better. And, you know, I would say don't undersell yourself. Be confident. That's very important. We women try to undersell ourselves, but actually we have loads amount of confidence. We can do anything, you know, the superwoman power that I call, you know. We all have different roles, not only as career women, but as mothers, as daughters, as daughter-in-laws, as wives. And we have to fulfill all those roles. So it's no different in an organization too. And I always say that you have to speak up. There was, during my career time, there was a point where I felt that I was being underpaid for what I was delivering. And I actually went up. Of course, it was a courageous move, but I had to go up and say, hey, you know, I think I should be better paid because another place is willing to give me a better pay. And when I said that, they actually went back, reconsidered, and actually came back up with a better offer for me, and I stayed on in that organization. So I would say that you have to speak up. If you don't speak up, no one will speak up for you. And at the end, you just have to turn back and leave the organization. And I think last but not the least, you know, if you can help others in the similar situation when you're in an organization, that would be fantastic. So lift up the other women too and give them that courage to move forward. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And the key word that I took away from your answer there was certainly the word culture, because I think that particular element, when a particular business, corporation, program has the proper culture in place that is supportive of that nature of equality, you know, then that's when positive things can move forward and you have a happy, you know, employment and workplace. But it takes the effort of changing culture, which is why we have these wonderful panels and all of these fine women leading us into a new age. Continuing on with this particular question about addressing and navigating certain inequalities, Khandicia, would you like to share some thoughts on this?
Sure. Before I directly answer that question, I want to bring up a couple of statistics that go back to what Dr. Fry was saying and what the immediate panelists were saying in regards to equality and pay in terms of women in the workplace. Bear in mind that in the US specifically, in order for women to even have a shot at being paid what men make, there had to be the Equal Pay Act that was enacted in 1963. 50 years later, which was last year, we were approximately 50 years later, women are only being paid 81.6 cents to the dollar that every man is being paid. Now, what does that tell us? If we look at other statistics, we see that women overall are highly educated or more educated as it compares to men. And one of the things that we have to be cognizant of when we're in the workplace, when we're navigating through workplace, or even in some situations of co-curricular activities, such as serving on boards or in community organizations, is that women have been given a bad rep. Let's go ahead and state that and put it out there. Women have been given a bad rep in terms of we lead too emotionally, or we have too many things that we're juggling. They don't want to hire a woman because she may have to go to her kid's soccer game or basketball game or dance recital or orchestra. And so women are expected to juggle the weight of the world. Have children, have a career, go to school, support a spouse, work in the community, but A, we're not paid equally. B, when we do lead from within, we typically lead in an orientation rather that is geared towards emotional intelligence. And for so long, that was something that was deemed inappropriate, it was deemed incorrect, it was negative from the patriarchal society, especially in the Western hemisphere and Western business. And so that's one thing that we have to do in these spaces where we find ourselves, whether we're mentoring someone, whether we're in academia, in the nonprofit, 501c3, or the government sector, is understand that as women have been given special insights and are quite intuitive. And that intuition is not counterproductive, it is not profitable. In fact, modern research shows us that using emotional intelligence when you lead helps make better decisions for the organizations. And so we need to begin to integrate some things that are innate to femininity into a woman's composition as we're in these workspaces.
Excellent. Yes, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. Trying to break that old narrative down and redefining it is certainly the task at hand. Cordelia, would you like to touch on some of your experiences?
So I want to use an analogy. You've got two clients who are waiting for the Starbucks around the corner to be opened. One of them is in a wheelchair and one of them has all of their physical faculties and they're standing. Now, when the door opens, if the door is opened wide enough and has a ramp, then the person with the wheelchair has an equal opportunity to get into the store as the person that's standing. But if there's no ramp, and if the door isn't wide enough, they're at a disadvantage. And so I want you to imagine what the world is like for a Black woman. Yeah? She's 16. She's just gone into finance. She's surrounded with Caucasian, mature, let's just say older men who are aghast that she's even in their midst because this is a boys' club, right? And she's female. And so for me, in my experience, being not able to have equity and equality was challenging. It was like being disabled. And that was what I faced day in, day out for the first 12 years of my career. But what I did to navigate my way around that is I used to come home to my mum, who was my matriarch and continues to be that. And she would say, listen, it's quite a funny story. All of those people that think that they are better than you, they're using the same bathroom that you're using. And I'm sorry to be crude, but hey, she was right. And so with that, I turned myself on my heels and I went back into the workplace the next day. And I decided that I would stand up and speak out, but speak out not because of my Blackness, not because of my femininity, but because I was a professional and I deserved to be treated the same. Yeah. And so with that tenacity, I was able to be recruited as one of the first Black women in the financial services sector to be part of a management development program. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy because all eyes were on me. But what I did, Nicholas, is I gave women who were younger than me the opportunity to design their career path. All by the horns, yeah? Take courage. And I showed them if I can do it, you can do it too. I hope that's useful.
That's very useful, and I think it's absolutely powerful, the idea of just having to go into some of these incredibly challenging obstacles in early professional career, and even, and I'm sure we have testimonials about, you know, the latter halves of individuals' careers, women's careers, of going in there and facing these pressures, but of course, you know, just rising to the occasion. It's quite inspiring, so thank you very much. Rakhi, would you like to offer us some of your insight as well?
Yes, absolutely. I would say, like many of you, I mean, I've personally had to navigate through some of my own inequalities. I obviously work in technology. We all know that it's a male-dominated field, but I'm also in sales within technology. So what people might not know is that sales actually has the second largest gender equity gap across all business functions after supply chain. Only about 39% of people in sales are women, and the higher up you get, the worse it is. So only about 20% of sales C-suite members are women. So there are some very real systemic issues. Those numbers have barely increased by only 3% over the past decade. So I have become very used to being the only. I'm used to being the only in a room. I'm the only millennial, the only woman, the only diverse person. Sometimes all of those things at once. And early on, I think I felt like that was something that I needed to conform to different standards. You needed to sort of adjust and try to play the part that you were supposed to play. But I have found that that's just not the case. I mean, I think it's all about being yourself and believing yourself. And, you know, if there are other young individuals who are in similar situations, I agree. It's important to surround yourself with great people who will call you out when you're sort of dimming your own light. Somebody had mentioned that in the IM window, but I think we see that quite a bit, unfortunately. We basically, I think, you know, so many times our biggest challenge as women is ourselves. And sometimes we're our own barrier to success when we hold ourselves back from various opportunities or downplay our contributions. I mean, we've all probably heard the statistic from several years ago from HP. They did a study and they said that women tend to only apply for jobs when they meet 100% of the qualifications, whereas men apply even when they only meet 60% of the qualifications. And in those instances, I think we just need to continue to build the confidence to take that step and surround ourselves with people who are going to push us to do such things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bravery being a real key there in pushing through and breaking down the ceiling. That's terrific. Gerald, we're going to come to you, and you'll be able to build off of this particular question that we have on the floor, but we're going to kind of jump into some more individualized questions for our panelists here. So I'll kind of reframe the question for you. In your opinion, how has academia evolved to prepare young female students for the demands and challenges of the professional workplace? I think we got you on mute there, Gerald.
Sorry about that.
Not a
As I
problem.
mentioned, Harvard Business School studies showed that actually women on 19 key leadership capabilities, this was a study that just came out in 2019, huge statistical power, women were superior on 17 out of 19 categories. So we're actually doing in academia a fairly good job of providing women with competencies. And in many countries, the women are far more educated than the men. So I think we're doing actually reasonably well in preparing women who are capable. The problem is the systemic, as I mentioned, the systemic occupational segregation. That's just horrible. So in my work, I do three things really. One is try to have greater awareness of the inequalities and injustices that exist in academia. They exist in things like salary differences, and there have been lawsuits, as we know, but we need to have the data. In my work in Thailand, we found, for example, that Thai women were grossly underrepresented as school directors and school principals, even though Thai women are far more educated than Thai men, as Suchitra well knows. And why? So you need to look into why those disparities exist. Why are a very talented woman professor, female professor, getting less than a man of similar capability? The first is making people aware of the data and the situation and the inequalities, the disparities that exist. And I think we have to fight this gender segregation through various means. I like to show the film Hidden Figures. That's a wonderful film, as you remember, about the Black mathematician women who were primarily responsible for our being able to send a person to the moon. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Andrew Horovchek, who's married to Anne-Marie Slaughter. This is actually a national case. Andrew is my good friend. And he has a PhD from Princeton in politics. And he basically, in their marriage, has been a house husband, doing the laundry, doing the cooking, doing all that so that Anne-Marie Slaughter could become Hillary Clinton's major assistant when she was Secretary of State and the first ever female dean of the Woodrow Wilson School of Princeton. So we have to publicize these alternative ways of thinking and doing. And then the third is in terms of hiring. Is as a leader in academia, I've really given high priority to hiring women of diversity. One of our speakers yesterday, I was instrumental. She's half indigenous Peruvian, half Japanese, and is one of the world's leading experts on indigenous education, Professor Sumida Huaman. I was instrumental in bringing her to the University of Minnesota.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Gerald. I think you really bring up some really great points there about how we're preparing the students and the kind of stories that have to get out there in order for us to continue to change the narrative and to continue to change the culture. So I'm going to go over to Cordelia. I'm really fascinated by your personal organization, Pearlescence. So in building your community, what are some of the common areas of opportunity for young female entrepreneurs and corporate professionals to build upon their skills?
Just repeat that for me, Nicholas.
Yeah, certainly. So in Pearlescence, it's if I understand it correctly, it's a community, a network that is about supporting and building up skills as well as confidence and all the things that you need to actually go out and take some of these obstacles on ahead. What are some common areas of opportunity, or what are some specific skills that you address or you work on through Pearlescence to really enrich your community and to get them out there?
Okay, cool. Totally understood now. Thanks. So in the corporate world, I help women to understand that they really don't need a mentor. What they need is a sponsor. When you have a sponsor, that person is normally going to open doors for you. They're going to speak up for you. They're going to be your voice, and they're going to be your ally within the organization. Most of those sponsors are going to be, unfortunately, men, but it's not unfortunate because men are keen, I am finding more and more, to understand what we need in order to help us climb the corporate ladder. So if you're a corporate professional and you're looking at the work that Pearlescence does, as I said before, we really do encourage you to look at sponsorship. It's not to say mentorship isn't important, but most of us in the corporate world are ambitious, and we know that we can go online and we can, upskill ourselves. But what we don't have is access to a strategic network, the boys club, that can help us get access to the opportunities. For the entrepreneurial women, it's really about understanding that they are good enough and that they really have to charge their worth. In the entrepreneurial world, you've got lots of women out there starting businesses and, making inroads into the economy in a very positive way. But when they are struggling with their own doubt and their own fear of not being good enough, not being able to show up, and the imposter syndrome, once I'm found out, then nobody will buy from me, that tends to be a challenge. So what we do with Pearlescence is help them to really grow from within and learn skills so that they surround themselves with the right people. Because, hey, here's the thing. You are the average of the 5 people that you spend your time with. So make sure that you create a community of like-minded people so that they can, you know, build you up and you can do the same.
Fabulous advice. Fabulous advice. You know, working in academia myself, you know, it's really about communicating to, you know, the students, specifically the young female leaders that I have in my program, about positioning themselves in the right networks and around the right community of individuals that are always going to be uplifting. And so I absolutely agree. I think that that's a wonderful point. Building up off of that a little bit, I'm going to go over to toss it over to Rakhi here. So what are some key ideas that female professionals should keep in mind as they navigate early and mid-career obstacles? You know, we've just heard about surrounding yourself with the proper thinkers. So what are some other things that we can keep in mind, Rakhi?
Well, I love the study that Dr. Fry just quoted confirming that women have the competencies. That doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, in my field, it's the same thing in sales. There were numerous studies, but there was recently one that said that women actually outperform sales by men by 3%. It was a study by Exactly. And I've seen that time and time again. And so I agree that we have the skills, but what I do think is missing in preparing women is providing them with some of the tangible skills development. And that's something that I think quite a lot about because as you mentioned, I'm currently leading the Women at IBM group in New York, but when I was at Microsoft, I actually led that group globally. So we had about 20,000 people across 15 different chapters and was very focused on how do you attract, retain, and advance women. And I had listened to a TED Talk once that completely changed my view of the way I was leading this organization. I'll post it in the IM window if anyone wants to watch. But it was a TED Talk by a woman named Susan Colantuono, and it was called The Career Advice You'll Probably Never Get. And basically what she says is, she says that the reason why women don't actually succeed in comparison to men and getting to the C-suite and all of that is actually because we're not investing in giving them the tangible skills development that they need to be successful. So business acumen, financial strategy, those types of things. And she tells this story about a CEO who was grooming a male and a female to potentially take his spot. And he said, you know, I wasn't even thinking about it, but I realized while I was teaching the woman to be confident, I was teaching the man the business. And that really spoke to me because I think sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of, you know, women's groups and things, we do almost over-rotate to some of the topics around building a network, building mentors, developing your confidence, finding your voice. All of those things are absolutely critical. They've been increasingly helpful for me in my career. But that's not all. If we're not also teaching women, how do you read a P&L 101? You know, the art of negotiation. How do you actually, you know, do you understand some of the fundamentals of business, of selling, of marketing, of finance? Those things are really what's going to help you actually land some of those C-suite roles and be successful in them. So that's one of the things I think a lot about, and I challenge anybody who's listening as you think about investing in your female talent. Don't just make it about career development programs and mentor programs. Think about how can you actually give them opportunities to practice and succeed.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Rakhi. Wonderful point there as well. Remy, going over to you and kind of still working in the same vein of, you know, the financial community to some degree here. What are some important points to consider for individuals who are seeking these roles of leadership in a very, very tightly bound financial community that's dominated, as we know, by the male culture?
So, you know, I think Rakhi has mentioned also that women are very good in sales. And whichever industry it is, I would say women are in the head start on sales. But of course, we are lacking some of the business skills that Rakhi mentioned behind the scenes, you know, the business strategies, the P&Ls. So I would rather say that you have to have 2 sets of skills. One is pertaining to the field or the job that you are currently working on in the organization. And the other one is some soft skills. So let me touch on both. I think Rakhi touched a lot on the job related, more the career oriented. The other part is the soft skills. The soft skills, one of them is doing networking within the organization themselves, trying to connect. I think women, we network less. Maybe it's because we have less time, but when you go to networking organization, or when I do go, it's mostly men there, because women are doing some other things during the networking time. They have a family. So getting into networking actually builds good relationships. And because of that, you can learn a lot from these networking with the right people, So I would say that that's very, very good. The other thing that I see is on the soft skill side is, which I've always pursued in my career, is my 3 Ps, which I can share with everyone. One is persistence. It's very, very important. Never give up. Always be there. Show up. It moves on. You will fail. Get up. Move on again. Don't let anyone push you down again. And second is patience. It takes time. Success is not built in a day. Wherever we come from, whichever education we have received, you have to work your way through. And last but not the least is perseverance. That's very important element, So I would say stick with the 3 Ps, but above all, do a job, get into a job that you're passionate about. If you're passionate about that job and you're committed to that job, you can do well and you can surpass and you can be in the top leadership role.
Certainly so, Remy. Thank you very much for that. Khandicia, I'd like to come back to you and with this conversation that we have really kind of moving along here. In the scope of organizational development, if you don't mind, the building of professional relationships, of course, is vital. What are some key concepts that a young professional can successfully utilize in their practice of building meaningful business relationships?
Nicholas, you said organizational development, and I think I wanted to get up and run. That is one of my subject matter expertise. And so everything that I do, I view from an organizational standpoint, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit. And immediately one of the things that comes to mind is communication in terms of what can be done for networking, advancement, career development, organizational development. And when I think about communication, I'm also looking at some of the comments in the chat, which I rarely do when I'm actually speaking on a panel or facilitating something. But Sandy mentioned that soft skills should be called essential skills. And I'm going to agree with her, but I'm going to take it a step further and say, in organizational development, especially as it pertains to women, we have to look at what have been typically or traditionally called soft skills, and they have to be interrogative with hard skills. They're not soft, they're very hard, they're very tangible. Communication is actually considered a, quote, soft skill, end quote. However, Johnson and Hackman tell us that without effective communication, there's no effective leadership. And then if you read Prigda, he tells you that leadership starts with a conversation. And Nordhaus defines leadership as the ability to influence. You cannot influence anyone if you can't actually adequately and veraciously communicate with them. And so it's pertinent that we understand 2 things. One, again, the necessity for effective communication and leadership development. And that is understanding our target audience, is how best to deliver your message to that audience, how best to get them to buy into that shared goal. Because with organizational development, it is all about the corporate culture, and corporate does not necessarily mean or isn't necessarily indicative of a for-profit business. It's simply the shared overall culture of the organization. And that culture is very much shaped by the communication, vice versa. And the second thing, when you're looking at organizational development and creating those networks for women and creating organizational development opportunities, is look at the men. And I know for some people that seems paradoxical because we're talking about women and the advancement and equality and equitability of women, but women are half of the species. The other half of the human species are males and men. And I'll borrow from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King for a moment. When he wrote about the civil rights movement, he condemned the lack of effective help from white evangelicals to help progress the civil rights of Blacks in America. And so women are never going to fully develop that cultural and organizational development to its full propensity without the advocacy of men.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So I think we're really caught on a really great thread here, and I just want to further unpack it if it's possible. And that is around, company organizational culture. How is it developed? And if it's negative, how do we navigate it? What are some strategies to do so? So I'm going to toss this one out there to the group and then just kind of make my way around. And I'll frame this question a little bit more specifically. How are company cultures developed? And over time, we know that they're formed based on the behavior of individual employees, and sometimes that can go askew, correct? So we need to make sure that we have the proper standards and expectations of all of our employees moving forward. So as leaders, what are you going to accept as good behavior? Like how can we understand that within this body of conversation? And at what point do you move on if not aligned with the culture? If that makes sense. So Remy, if you don't mind jumping in on this one to kind of get it going.
Can I have that question a little bit again, the last part?
Certainly, I can be a little long-winded, so I apologize. I get caught up in my own thoughts. So it's around, company culture, right? And how it's ultimately developed. And what are some great strategies to have in place to develop the right company culture? And if the culture is not quite there, what are some actions that people can take or look toward in addressing such?
Okay, thank you. I think when you look at company culture, I think we talk about being inclusive and being diversity and inclusion. I can only share that I have worked with a few organizations that have been very inclusive and diverse, and especially for women, and different ethnicities. And there are some few things I think I would like to share, which I felt left an impact till today, and I felt that was being very making you have a sense of belonging to the organization, that the organization actually cares about you. One such thing is embracing culture. So you have people with different ethnicities, diversity working in the organization. So what you should do is respect their culture, which is celebrate with them. We actually had where you could choose a public holiday of your own, not what the government chooses for you. But if I'm an Indian ethnicity, it was Diwali, so that's what we celebrate. So you could take a day off for Diwali. So that was really nice. Another such thing was, it's your birthday, you deserve a break. Take a holiday. That was another thing. When I was a mother, of course, the nursing room was a blessing. So I felt, yes, the organization was listening. We had a nursing room within the premises of the organization. There are others that also have prayers room, for people there. And another one is daycare. So the parents are working, the kids are back from school. Where do you put the kids? The parents are still working. So actually you had a daycare center within the organization with all these old computers set up, So I think it already shows that the organization is trying to embrace all the diversity, whatever issues you have, just to make sure that everyone has a sense of belonging. And that's a way to retain your staff too. And especially for women, making them feel a part of the organization, use of inclusive language, I think, is one that is very, very important. We tend to generalize and sometimes exclude some of the audience when we speak. So I think that's another important element that should be part of the company culture, Last but not the least, I could share that in my organization that I worked with, they actually had coffee with the CEOs. So everyone had the opportunity to reach up to the key leadership role and have a chat and share. I think that's what really builds up the whole company culture and includes all the diversity. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Remy. Cordelia, would you like to jump in on this one?
So when I look at culture, I look at our families, and they say that it takes a village to raise a child, right? So the only way that you can create a culture, I believe, that's conducive with diversity and inclusion is to have those family meetings, not the town halls that we're all used to in the corporate world, but to have those frank, honest conversations, which enables everyone to share their truth. However, it's got to come from the top down, right? So really, are the senior management team, the C-suite, just playing lip service? Are they just looking at the quota, or are they really wanting to change culture? Because you've got to have a look at their background. How were they raised? How do they see things? What's their unconscious bias? Because we've all got them. And how can we bring that to the table and have those frank, open conversations? And going back to what Khandicia says, it's communicating those thoughts in a way that's conducive to change and moving forward. So that's how I feel culture in any organization can be developed further. And you know what? Some cultures are just set in stone. It doesn't matter what policies come out, they won't change. So you have to, look at the management team and see if it's time for change for them.
Right, Cordelia, I think that's an excellent point. So I'm going to kind of use that and spring back over to academia, to Gerald really quickly, because I think it's interesting in how we prepare young women leaders in academia for these kind of obstacles. So Gerald, if you don't mind, what are some of the methods or some of the ideas that are happening in academia right now that are preparing young women leaders for these kind of obstacles in terms of company culture?
I'm so glad you brought up this question of organizational culture. And scholars at the Harvard Business School, again, are very deeply concerned, as we are at the University of Minnesota, about the well-being of people in the workplace. Unfortunately, I think the estimate is around a third of the people are not happy in their workplaces. They can't wait until Friday comes, and they hate Monday. That is exactly not where we should be. So we want to work hard to try to create a workplace that is not toxic, but where we really want to go and where we can flourish and where we can have flow and where we can have creativity. I had the privilege of working for Nike directly for the founder and CEO of Nike, Phil Knight, and that was the best organizational culture I've ever been in. I was there Sunday morning, I was there Friday night. You just wanted to be part of that Nike culture. It was so powerful. So we need to find ways to have leaders who are going to create those. And in my research on education, it's so clear about school directors and principals that create toxic cultures versus these kinds of cultures that promote creativity and flow, and where people really want to love their work and want to be there first thing Monday morning.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Gerald. And moving this along, and we're going to come to you, Cordelia, so just give us one moment here. Rakhi, I'd love to hear from you in terms of company culture.
Sure. I think of the quote by Verna Myers: diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I love that quote. I've actually heard a variation on it. Some say belonging is having the DJ play your playlist at the party. And it's just such a nice visual to really understand what diversity, inclusion, belonging can truly mean. And, I think a big piece of this is allyship. Somebody has mentioned that earlier, but we need men to play a very strong and a very active role if we want to truly move the needle, because let's be real, men have contributed to the problem for centuries and we need them to be part of the solution. The reality is today, most positions of power across every industry are still held by men. So unless we have their support, their leadership, it's going to be really hard to drive long-term change. And I am delighted to see, how many men in leadership roles have stepped up to the plate to offer support. I'm optimistic that we'll see more and more of that. I even look at some of the number of men who have joined today's session. Thank you to all of you for being here today. But my advice is just, don't just walk the walk, but also talk the talk. I'll give you a very real example. It's Women's History Month. We have International Women's Day around the corner on March 8th. Most corporations, for example, are doing very large scale events. We are at IBM. And every man is, wanting to jump on the bandwagon and help to promote the event. But some of them have actually scheduled meetings during the event. So it's kind of like, those are some of the small things. It's like, okay, you're supporting, you're inviting people, but if you don't even plan to attend and you're taking people away from the ability to attend, that's actually not allyship, that's lip service. So I think it's sharing some of those tangible examples. And a lot of times I truly don't think it's malicious. I think it's just, us having to take a moment to educate people on what is truly expected of allyship and what we need in order to really feel like we have your support in moving the needle here.
Excellent, Rakhi. Thank you so very much. Going over to Khandicia, speaking about company culture and your point of view on it.
So before I kind of give my personal inflection of what culture is, let's clearly define what organizational culture is. And Shine defines it as a shared experience. It is a shared experience and it's the shared learning of a group. So whether we're talking about IBM, a nonprofit like the March of Dimes, a government, this culture is the shared experience, not just of the current composition, so not just your current employees or organizational members or your current family members, but it's the composition that goes back to its founding. And so when you look at culture, people think, oh, change management is so easy, or changing the culture, all we have to do is change the culture and we can change everything. Well, okay, sure, that's true, but it's not that easy. You can't just write a recommendation. What I do consulting, so I can't just say for an organization, here are my 7 recommendations, now go fix all of your problems. Because your problems, your culture began to derive the moment you filed for a name with the Secretary of State in the US or other foreign entities of authority. And so in addition to the shared learning aspect of it and the shared experience, each person brings what are known as artifacts to that culture. And those artifacts are composites of what make up that individual, whether it's your race, your ethnicity, your place of origin, your religious beliefs, the fact that you have kids, the fact that you don't have kids, your demographics, your educational background, and all of those artifacts then become part of that culture. And so in order to change a culture within an organization, Cordelia is absolutely right. And the literature states that it's top down, but you have to understand that the top just doesn't mean the CEO or the executive director or the mayor or the president. The top goes back to the beginning. So I'm going to pick on America for just a moment. Now all of a sudden people are like, oh my God, there's a racist problem in America. There are race issues in America. There are women issues. There are problems. No, this is not new. It goes back to 1776. And in order for America to change that corporate culture, that organizational culture, first of all, they have to admit to the ills that existed and that these ills were perpetuated and they were embedded as a bedrock of who America is. And so until you understand that about corporate culture, and organizational development, you don't even get what org culture is. And in terms of the behaviors, now it's part of the question you asked in the beginning, what do you accept as a leader? We also have to appropriately define leader, which I won't go into, but what you have to realize is that the behaviors of individuals within any type of organizational culture are direct implementation of what that culture dictates and what the people who not just ascribe, but subscribe and predicated that culture to be. And you don't change it until you change individuals from the top down.
Khandicia, you're absolutely right. And I love the fact of how you really framed that particular answer. And I think that that is certainly a problem that perpetuates American culture, is that we forget certain parts of our histories or our challenges that we certainly have. And then we kind of sensationalize it for other purposes and agendas. And it's not a constant work toward an effective positive end. We use it to flare up action. So I think conferences like this and other conferences around the world that are going on, this is what's important about keeping that conversation going. So in stemming or building off of this and springboarding, I'm really curious about everyone's core philosophy as a bit of a curveball here. So in cultivating a diverse and inclusive work environment, what might be a core philosophy that should be, certainly that you believe should be at the forefront of an organization that kind of shapes their mission moving forward? And we'll begin with Rakhi, if you'd like to answer that.
Sure, that's a great question. You know, honestly, the first thing that came to my mind is just that it's the right thing to do. I know it's a very, very simple concept, but I almost find that so many organizations and companies are almost over rotating to the business aspect of diversity. And, you know, a lot of consulting firms and things, they're saying, you know, companies, you need to commit to action, make this a business priority because that's going to help your bottom line. And I think that's obviously important. We got to treat diversity like any other business objective where you have measurable goals and KPIs and management systems, and make it a core part of your measurement system and your performance reviews with, you know, get to green plans and everything. That's not always easy. That's not always comfortable, but that's what it takes. But I think that's actually fundamentally the wrong issue. If you have to convince people to make this a priority just because it's going to help their bottom line, it's more about really winning over the hearts and minds of people and wanting to work in environments where people genuinely feel that they want an inclusive society, that they want to have that. Because, you know, you think about companies like IBM or Salesforce, nowadays, you should want to have sellers that represent the client base, that represent society. If you only have a bunch of, you know, salespeople who come from competitive sports backgrounds, who are all men, who all went to Ivy Leagues, how are you going to connect with the 25-year-old female CEO who just became a billionaire? And so I think so much of it is just really thinking about how can you just make it the right thing to do, surround yourself with companies and people who actually treat this as something that they personally believe in and very actively believe in versus something they're just giving lip service to.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Remy, would you like to jump in on a core philosophy as well?
Yeah, I think if you want to create a diverse work culture or inclusive, first thing is you hire. The hiring part, hiring the talent should be diverse too. You know, you should not be just looking the same type of people. And most of the companies tend to do that, you know. So I think, you know, we have young CEOs now coming up, you know, with the new era coming in, everything is changing. So I think we're seeing a lot of diversity and inclusion. But of course, you know, if you look at the primitive offices, I would say, is all closed doors, right? You all had individual rooms. But today it's an open door policy. It's becoming a hot desk now, you know, you don't even have a desk. And that already shows a part about how you can actually mix with other people, diverse people, because with a shut door, you can't do anything. But with an open door, a hot desk, you'll be moving around and mixing with people, and that becomes the corporate culture core, you know. Some of the offices, you wouldn't see a snooker table, you know, for entertainment purpose. You're stressed, just come and play some snooker. And you can have that interaction, you know. So I feel that's just, if you want to do it, you can create it. And you create it from the people that you hire. So whoever you hire are the ones that have to have the right fit to have that attitude of being diverse and inclusive.
Excellent.
That's what I feel.
Well, thank you, Remy, very much. Cordelia, you had your hand up on the last question, and I'm sorry that I didn't make it back around. I apologize. So if you'd like to begin by addressing that point that you wanted to add in, that would be great, as well as contribute a core philosophy.
Okay, so it's great that you didn't answer me because it dovetails into what you're asking about now. So when Gerald mentioned the Nike experience and the fact that he was quite happy to go in on Sundays, I was intrigued by the management style of the owner, because what I want to say is you can't be what you can't see. And so if you are serious about building an organization that has the right culture, that's going to make the changes that the world needs in terms of the misrepresentation of people who are not being treated fairly in the workplace, yeah, then the senior management team have got to lead like a leader that their team want to see. And so that's what I believe is the core philosophy of any organization. We are going to lead like you want us to lead, in order that you can have a role model to model. And I think that that must be what Nike has done successfully in order to bring cohesion to his team, because it's all about a team effort, right? When you're playing football, you don't care if the person is, you know, black, white, blue, or pink. You all are aiming towards a goal. And I'm not into football or cricket or anything else, but that's what I'd like to share.
Excellent, Cordelia. And so I'll bounce over to Gerald to kind of maybe use some of his experience at Nike to kind of circle back around on this. Gerald.
It's interesting that Cordelia mentioned sports, because I have a theory, and I think the data would support it, that integrated teams in sports do better than segregated teams. So we should look at the data. And in terms of my core philosophy, that will get me started, because first of all, I'm not a hate person, but I hate all segregations. I hate segregation. So therefore, key to my philosophy is gender integration, not gender segregation, ethnic integration, and age integration. I hate ageism. Cultural democracy. We've forgotten about cultural democracy. It's such an important concept. All people talk about is political democracy. They've forgotten the critical importance of cultural democracy, the diversity advantage. And again, and this is crucial, both in any organizational context, every individual should have the opportunity to realize their full potential. And finally, related to the earlier remark about our unhappy workforce, and I talked about the most unhappy people, 1/3, but actually, as was pointed out by somebody in the chat, 2/3 of our workforce are actually unhappy. It would be very interesting to look at the gender differences. Are women less happy in the workplace than men? I don't have those data. That would be a great project for somebody to look into, the happiness of women versus men in the workplace. And my final philosophy is we need organizations that promote flow and creativity to address the boredom problem and the unhappiness problem in the workplace. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gerald. Khandicia, can you offer some of your ideas around core philosophies?
Sure. So I actually have a list. As everyone's been talking, it's given me the opportunity to make sure I didn't forget anything. And in order to make all of this a reality, bring it to fruition, to move towards the goal of inclusion, equitability, truly a chance for all, you must have it in your budget. If it's not in an organization's budget, it does not happen. Exactly. So don't put it in your strategic plan if you don't have it in the budget, because you can't have programs that promote equity if you don't have any money, or if you don't have the time. It could be free, but if you don't budget the time, like was mentioned, you're having an event that's supposed to promote women, but you have people coming to a meeting at the same time. Nobody should be going to a meeting. So you have to budget both financially, resource-wise, and time-wise to make it a priority. It must be intentional. True integration of equality, whether it's socioeconomic equality, demographic equality, racial equality, gender equality, religious equality, third world versus first world, it must be intentional. If it's not intentional, you're not going to be all in. You're not going to, as the saying goes now, you're not going to lean in. If it's not intentional, then it's just a byproduct and maybe it's a happy mistake. We have to confront our own biases to do this. And that's scary for some people. And let's be honest, the reason it's scary for some people is because nobody wants to admit I'm a racist, I'm a bigot, I'm a male chauvinist, or there are parts of me that are misogynistic that I didn't realize. Or when I look at, when I'm in another country and I look at people, it scares me because they're walking in streets in big groups practicing a ceremony to honor their religious beliefs. We have to confront those biases because those biases then carry to the organization and they create corporate bias. We have to value diversity of thought. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago for a book and someone was writing about board experience, and one of the questions was, if you had a perfect board member, what would you want them to have? And I said, diversity of thought. You need diversity of composition, not just of racial, the obvious things, racial, gender, or even religious, but you need diversity of thought. And that is lacking in most instances because people are afraid to be challenged. And Coons and Posner tell us that an exemplary leader actually encourages, one of their behaviors is to challenge the process. They encourage people to challenge the process. We must hold our organizations accountable. And one final thing I want to say, and I probably won't get all the way there, but there's a conversation going on in the chat about open door policy versus open mind. I'd rather have an open mind rather than an open door. But studies actually show, Peter Schein, who's an organizational development expert, has surveyed various organizations throughout the years, HP, German organizations, and found that when people work in collaborative settings with open no doors or open doors, the organization flourishes far beyond that closed door mentality.
Thank you very much, Khandicia. So, I mean, of course, I think our entire audience is learning a tremendous amount. I know I certainly am. In trying to do my part, I have a daughter, 7 years old, and I've been doing everything that I can to teach her how to be a leader, how to be strong, how to be confident, how to be brave, how to stand up for herself, and how to confront, you know, things of, you know, issues or obstacles of inequity or inequality in her own little world. So I'm learning so much from everything that everyone's saying here. So it kind of brings me to this idea of community and stakeholders and the image that we put out there for our strong women professionals. So in your opinion, as we begin to wind down here our panel discussion, maybe I can get some thoughts on this. How has relationships with these community stakeholders in your respective fields improved the image of a strong woman professional? And if Cordelia, if you'd like to begin, I'm sorry, I saw you're thinking there for a second, and I already said your name. Hopefully, we'll give you some time here to think. But that particular image, because it's such a shifting thing, and I know that in U.S. culture, with the success of the women's soccer team, specifically, one of those items that I used to really motivate and inspire my daughter, it was certainly something that got commodified a little bit after their win in the 90s, but is certainly kind of finding its own space, though there's plenty of hurdles and obstacles to still come. But back to you, Cordelia, what might be those relationships with community stakeholders that can help improve the image of a strong woman professional?
Yeah, so the reason why I had that look of, let me think about this, Nicholas, was because I was trying to kind of put a context to the question or the thought that you wanted to explore. And I'm going to take it from the angle that I see it as. And I believe that community stakeholders are your allies. And so in business, you need more allies than adversaries, right? So you've got to build connection. You've got to build authentic relationships with these stakeholders in order for them to fully embrace who you are as a human being. I mean, technology and social media has really disturbed God's original plan for mankind, in my opinion. He created us to be in connection and fellowship with each other, but instead we're on the phone, we're on the laptop. And so for me, I feel that if we go back to basics and we build authentic relationships, which is basically the work I do with the company I own, Pearlescence, then we build a relationship with our stakeholders who become our allies and will support us through thick and thin. So I hope that answers your question, Nicholas. I've taken it on maybe a tangent, but that's my view on it.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Cordelia. Rakhi, what might be your experiences with this question in your field?
Well, I think community plays a big role. And, you know, as I mentioned, I've had the opportunity to lead some of our business resource groups for women at the companies that I've worked at. So I sort of think of community in that regard. I think things like that are so important. I mean, we've talked a lot about how you get more women in the door. The thing that keeps me up at night is it doesn't matter how many great attraction programs you have, recruitment programs that you have, if you don't foster an environment where they can thrive and succeed when they get there. And a big piece of that is community programs for women, designed by women, you know, career development programs for women, mentor programs for women, executive coaching programs for women. A lot of these things are kind of geared toward just sort of top talent, but we know that women aren't as good as advocating for themselves. We know that they might dim their light, as we talked about earlier. So how do you make sure that you're picking out the women who do have a lot of potential? And I think some of these communities have the opportunity to really help amplify what they are doing. So with the Women at IBM community, for example, a big piece of it is just recognition initiatives. We have a Sheroes program. So every month we highlight all of the Sheroes in our community. So people who are doing incredible things across the company, or male allies who are helping to open doors and break barriers for us. But I think, you know, that's a really important piece of thinking about how you recognize and also how you keep people engaged and excited. And the most important thing about some of these business resource group communities is that it helps you see that you're not alone, and it also helps you build your network. It's very, very easy to stay siloed in your field, your organization, your company. Networking is so important outside of what you're used to. And that's why community helps you engage with different people across different business functions, across different areas, so that you can really think about how you open and widen your aperture and your perspective and develop in your career.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Khandicia, your point of view on the stakeholders and the image of the strong woman professional.
So I think that this again is two-dimensional for me. One, I'm glad you asked the question, because a lot of people fail to realize that the community is a stakeholder in any organization. When you're looking at stakeholders from the organizational development, leadership, or design entity, stakeholders are not just your employees or your organizational members. They're your vendors, they're the community, they're what we call in my term, the end users. So those who you're serving or who reap the benefits of whatever work you're doing every day. And a lot of times people fail to realize that all of those components are the stakeholder of a business or an organization. And so it is important to understand that what you do every day affects someone. In my current place of employment, what I do affects a customer. What people do, for instance, you know, use the March of Dimes, their research affects unborn babies, pregnant mothers, people who don't have adequate access to healthcare. And so you have to realize that all of those entities are your stakeholders. And when decisions are made, it affects everyone. And so how businesses can go, and this is the second dimension, in making sure there's appropriate representation, because that's so critical for us, is the appropriate representation. So many people who are in marginalized classes state that they don't see anyone on TV who looks like them. They don't see anyone as the CEO of a Fortune 500 company that looks like them. They don't see millionaires that look like them. The only millionaires that see they look like them are sports, and they can't play sports, or they can't rap or sing. And so having the appropriate representation is key. And one way to build that relationship with communities is to work with women-based organizations. For instance, I belong to a predominantly and historically Black American sorority, which has been in existence for over 100 years. There are 3 other organizations just like mine. Combined, we have memberships of hundreds of thousands of people. And recently, Google and my organization, along with the other 3 historically and predominantly Black American sororities, have founded a collaboration and a partnership to help hundreds of thousands of females, women, to learn to code and acquire the skills that will put them in that work arena. And so as we're continuing to build the sponsorships and what I mentioned before, corporate social responsibility, having allies and partnerships and collaborations with organizations of such will help magnify and exponentiate being able to move women further along in that equitable distribution of power, employment, development.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for that. Gerald, if you don't mind, moving on to you with that particular idea of stakeholders in the community and the image of the strong woman professional.
I'm really glad you asked the question about stakeholders, because I think maybe if we have strong women leadership, perhaps we can broaden our vision of stakeholders. Again, when I was at Nike, Phil Knight was always complaining. He was the CEO and founder of Nike. I'm a prisoner of quarterly earnings. So he had stakeholders who were shareholders. So there's the broad community that's a stakeholder. There are the employees of our own organization who might not be that happy. There are customers, the people who buy the Nike products. Then there's the philanthropy that we give to universities, like Oregon has received so much money from Nike. And let me close on this because I found it very inspiring. Nike had, and I do a lot of work in Vietnam, Nike had a program in Vietnam in the Mekong Delta with low-income women to help them become entrepreneurs through small-scale credit. It was a great program. It was reviewed by outsiders, really helped these women, uplifting these women to become very successful local entrepreneurs. Had nothing to do with shoes, sports, athletics. It was just part of Nike's corporate social responsibility. And I think we need to broaden the vision of stakeholders and include the people in the common good.
Excellent, Gerald. Thank you so very much. And we're running short on time here, but I want Remy to certainly chime in and round out this conversation with her points of view on this. Remy, if you don't mind, the stakeholders and the strong woman image.
Okay, thank you. I think everyone has spoken quite a fair bit. I think for me, the summary is basically to build a supportive ecosystem within our own community, whether it's a big community or it's a small community. I think we all have gone through a lot in the last 2 years with COVID and everything. And one key thing that I feel that there are lots of women down there who don't know how, where, what to do. You know, they're looking for that support system. And if we as women can actually bring in, you know, small little things matter, and if we can build that up, that support ecosystem, you know, it would help a lot of people. For example, what we have done here in Bangkok is, I told you, you can't find women in networking in the evenings, right? They're busy with their family life. Mornings are not possible. So we did something that was in the afternoon, you know, when the husband is in office, the kids are at school, you know, and creating that system is that you just come in with the intention that you want to do something. You need a friend, you need a mentor, you need some guidance to start up your own business. And we are here for you, you know. You don't know how to do, you know, we talked about a lot about soft skills. You know, how are you going to develop that soft skills? Networking can be daring, you know, we had that in the chat just now. It's very frightening to be out there, but if you can do it together and you can share it, it's phenomenal. And that's how you make connections, you make recommendations, and you help them grow as an individual, build that sense of confidence in them, and helping them to move forward during these uncertain times, you know. So I think, yes, stakeholders, it's very important, and to give back what we have is the most important thing.
Thank you so very much, Remy. Everyone, thank you for your time, your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise, your insight on all of it. I think that this was a wonderful panel, and I hope that our audience was able to receive some just great insight and some wonderful gems to be able to move forward and enact in their own personal lives or in their own personal businesses. So again, I want to thank all of you for your time, and I want to thank everyone, and please continue to be a part of this wonderful conference comments, and let's build on this connection and build on this dialogue as we're moving forward. Thank you, everyone, again, and I can't wait to hear more conversations from all of you. Thank you.